12 to 15 minutes, maybe maximum, to do your presentation.
No, thank you so much, Prof. And let me just show my face so everyone can see me for a minute before I go into the presentation. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a very, very busy day for me. I would love to have stayed for the whole session, but it's one of those back-to-back days. But I do want to try and give as much value on the topic as I can. You know, obviously not being an academic, having last done my academic work in 1993, I'm a little bit behind all of you guys. So I'm coming very much from a practitioner's perspective, trying to give some of the practical challenges that we face and try and come at the subject from the way we are trying to deal with it. So I've sort of done a short presentation on that basis, where I'm going to try and cover the broader issues, but I think they'll come out more in the writing of the chapter itself. But hopefully it'll be informative. If it's okay, what I could do, I see it's nearly 9 o'clock, would be for me to bring up my presentation. And did you say 10 minutes? So I'll keep my eye on the clock. Because I know there might be questions that come after that as well.
Yes. Yeah, that'll be great if you can maybe stick to 10 minutes, but if needed, we can give you an extra few minutes to complete if necessary. But okay. Yes, I think thanks, Hamish. While you load your screen, I'm just going to welcome everybody this morning. I think many of you have joined us at the first session last week on Wednesday during the morning, and I think the webinar, the fourth webinar on post-COVID restoration of Aerotropoli, was welcomed by our Deputy Vice Chancellor, and so he cannot be with us this morning. But again, I think I want to welcome everybody that's joined us and that will be joining us this morning. We are doing this in particular to also give our stakeholders some insight into the challenges that we have within Aerotropoli in the post-COVID period, but also we are building let's say a group of people around Aerotropoli, not only here in Durban, but broader in Africa and internationally, to assist in future with the work that we are undertaking within our institute, to assist us in publishing, I think, valuable and valid information around the development of Aerotropoli. So indeed, we do appreciate practitioners like Mr. Hamish Erskine that's joined us here this morning and will do his presentation. And of course, as you know, the ultimate outcome is on this first round to publish the first volume of a book on Aerotropoli, in particular in the post-COVID dispensation. So without further ado, I want to welcome Mr. Hamish Erskine this morning. And Hamish, you're welcome to proceed. And we are really looking forward to your presentation, and we will allow for some questions and comments towards the end of your presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. And good morning to everybody on the call. I'll try and get to the key issues as quickly as I can. So the topic and the focus is, it's something we do on a day-to-day basis in the organization and as a broader group, which I'll explain a little bit, which is what's known as route development, which is attracting and retaining airlines. Now, if we're discussing Aerotropolis, Aerotropoli, this is the heart of it. If you don't have connectivity, if you do not have air services servicing your airport and your Aerotropolis, it actually isn't an Aerotropolis. It's an urban development. The connectivity provided by these air services, and then the wide range of other activities that then get stimulated by air services is enormous. It's an extremely well understood concept globally. We've been going, for example, to the Global World Routes Conference since 2013 as a province. We've been a consistent attendee. And what I can tell you is that that is where the world meets and competes for in a rapid session that runs over 3 days of 20-minute meetings, where you've got 20 minutes to sell your case to an airline, and then you move on to the next one. And everybody's doing it from literally every corner of the world. And the reason they're doing that is because airports and regions understand how important it is and how critical it is for economic growth, for air services to be stable, predominant, and well connected globally and regionally, and for that matter, domestically for any airport. Now, the South African scenario, and maybe I'll just move on to the next slide because I'm trying to sort of unpack it a little bit here. Globally, what you've seen generally has been a breaking up of monopoly infrastructure. So you used to have big companies like, let's call it BAA, which is a British Airports Authority, and there the government decided to break up that monopoly and to create and allow for airports to compete. So you've had a breakup, for example, of Heathrow and Gatwick and others. And airports increasingly are now competing on their own merits and competing against each other to provide that service. And I think if you look at the way the abstract is written, it talks a lot about that, about how you create something that is more of a passenger, a user-focused experience that looks at a much wider range of integration, backward integration. And so in South Africa, we have a couple of challenges. We still largely have a monopoly situation where AXA pretty much controls most of the airport network. Now, because of that, it is then regulated. So it can't act beyond its regulatory controls. And I'll maybe touch on that, on why that's a challenge. So you do have airports like Lanseria that are starting to compete and to a degree do a trade port, because although we have an AXA airport in our heart, the way the Aerotropolis and the way that the project was conceived, we understood that there were certain elements where we had to create a more competitive environment. And that we've tended to do around cargo and around the broader Aerotropolis development, so that it isn't just a single party involved and designated by its regulation. So I think it's perhaps to then go back and say, well, what is this air services thing all about, and who benefits from it? And how does it impact? So keeping in line with the way the abstracts have been written, there's, if we call them the shareholders, shall we say, there's two direct beneficiaries that get essentially revenue direct from the airlines. That would be Airports Company South Africa, and that is primarily their aeronautical revenues. So there's a set of regulated charges which they get every time an aircraft lands, and about 50% of their business comes from that. They then have non-aeronautical revenues, but which are directly linked to the activities of the passengers that come on that aircraft, or the people that come to meet those passengers. And those are all of what you'll see, the retail concessions, the parking concessions, but all directly linked to the activity of the aircraft. If there are no aircraft, there are no revenues. And I think it's very, very important. If I had done this presentation 2 years ago, I would probably be coming at this from a very different angle. But COVID genuinely in this industry, this is probably one of the most impacted industries in the world by COVID. It has fundamentally shifted and changed the industry, and we are learning very new things. So it's quite difficult to sort of exactly predict and write an article, write a chapter in this time when we are going through such fundamental shifts and changes and challenges with this industry. But I think some of the basic principles still apply, and we'll try and just quickly touch on that as we go. So you've got those two, and ourselves as Dubai Trade Port, we handle the cargo off those aircraft, so we have the direct relationships again with the airport. So you have that kind of direct at airport type of relationship where the revenues are direct. But then you have those that, if they don't have that connectivity, they suffer directly. And with that connectivity, they have direct benefits as well. And these are industries which rely on, for example, in the first instance, tourism, hospitality, conferencing. And I've put VFR on there. VFR is a term which refers to visiting friends and relatives, but it's about essentially, it almost talks to the individual's economic position within a particular region and their ability to connect globally as well. But all of these industries, as you know, if you just look at what happened with COVID and the stopping of the flights and everything that came with that, how severely impacted these industries are. And their ability to grow and the ability to sustain themselves has a very high dependency on, in South Africa, domestic, regional, and international air connectivity. The second, less well understood, but as critically important, is the logistic cargo forwarding trade, the manufacturing and aviation sectors. These sectors are, a lot of them built on a just-in-time basis. A lot of the inputs into manufacturing and obviously also global trade in e-commerce has seen a significant rise. So every aircraft that lands, every wide-bodied and narrow-bodied aircraft that lands at an airport will bring with it not only those tourists and those business people traveling, but will always be carrying anything from 1 to 16 tons of cargo. And within that cargo are critical, very often critical components that go into a wide range of manufacturing processes, spare parts, but also consumer goods, high value goods. And similarly, when that aircraft departs, it will depart with generally the highest value cargo being produced in the region it's flying out of. And the more markets it can serve, the better. So there's a critical linkage, and aircraft are therefore designed, and increasingly going forward, the more modern, newer aircraft tend to be very balanced between their cargo loads and their passenger loads. And then there are the activities which bring the people, business, education, commerce, medical, industry, property. Without that connectivity, without that ability to bring people in and out of the region in a cost-effective and an efficient way, all of these are constrained. Let's put it that way. They can either be highly stimulated by that increased connectivity. It's a linkage to the world. Now, obviously, when you look at that and you think, well, what would happen without that? And that's a very real existential type of threat that the industry is looking at the moment, because we're going through obviously a massive carbon shift globally. So there is a huge amount of investment going into the technology, which will ultimately reduce the carbon impact of these aircraft over time, because those travelers, all of those different components there have consumers or have users, and those users are ever more conscious of their carbon footprint, of their, whether they need to travel and how they need to manage that travel because of the impact. So airports, again, and the way we approach airlines is changing in that the more we can offset that carbon at an airport level, at an Aerotropolis level, with sustainable type of development, the more we're able to paint a bigger, broader case for the continuation of air services and all the continuation of these benefits, these massive benefits to the economy. And that's where your stakeholders come in. Obviously, your big stakeholders, because of the economic drivers that are associated with the industry, are your national, provincial, and local government, each with a specific interest. You've got big international and local regulators and all of the service providers within government, all of whom either generate revenue or are players within the aviation space. You've then got obviously those that promote investment and tourism. So all your national, local, and provincial tourism investment promotion agencies, and then your business sector, your investors, your service providers, and increasingly those are the ones clustered within the Aerotropolis. So there's this huge complex network of beneficiaries, stakeholders, shareholders that are highly linked to the air services industry, be it at a domestic level, regional, or international. And it's a critical time because the industry is having to face a recovery period out of COVID. It is also having to address much bigger global challenges with greening. So, I mean, I could talk for a long time on this, but I'm realizing I can't see my clock, but I'm probably going a bit into time. So let me try and be a bit quick. So what are our route development objectives? There's always got to be a reason to travel, and you have to sustain the market. Airlines are hugely expensive operations, and when they go down hard. They spend a lot of money. Each trip is a hugely expensive thing. So you've got to be able to sustain a market. You've got to know that market well, and you've got to partner with everyone in that market. So it's not like you can just connect with the world. You have to connect with the world on the basis of your strengths and where you have opportunity. So as a route development committee in Durban Direct, what we've tried to do, and I can talk about it at another time, but Durban Direct is essentially coming together of a wide range of parties. Those with direct interests, ourselves and AXA, those with as I said, the beneficiary stakeholders, so the tourism authorities, Durban and provincial, and even some of the regional ones, the trade and investment, business, tourism industry, national government, provincial government. We've pulled everyone together in a committee, and a route development committee branded as Durban Direct, where we essentially are looking to see how can we increase the air connectivity from Durban within the strategic priorities of both ourselves as Durban Tradeport, but as the province as well, looking to broaden and widen as much as possible the operations to see how we can compete as a secondary city. How can we build the Aerotropolis and take our share of the indirect traffic that is going to Joburg, and increase trade and leisure, which I've spoken to, and very importantly, to drive the Aerotropolis development. So the route development objectives are very geared towards economic growth and creating new opportunities. The industry, this is just, there's essentially three elements that airlines look for, when they go to any region. And that routes conference I was talking about actually really is all about, kind of this kind of trading that goes on. Now, as a country, we don't do revenue-based incentives. We're very conservative in that respect, and we don't underwrite the performance of airlines, which I think is a good thing. It creates a more honest relationship. What we do is we do some, as Durban Tradeport, we had the foresight many years ago to set up a fund based on an approval by Treasury, where we do look at some of the cost-based incentives. So because AXA is regulated, They can't do this. They never will be able to do this because it's anti-competitive. But as Dubai Trade Port, we can, on the basis of the economic development opportunity, we can look to offset some of the operating costs on the basis of certain clearly understood terms and conditions. Usually first mover, we don't do it if there's a competitor on the route, but we normally do a startup kind of promotion where we would offset some of the early costs to allow an airline to get sustainable on the route. But most important is marketing. And working very, very closely with the airline to market and build that market in that region. And we had a very successful project with BA, which unfortunately got turned on its head by COVID, where we did a very strong program in the UK and in parts of Europe that led to significant growth on the London route. So essentially, we've just come to the end, really, of our first 5 years of our route development strategy, where we had targeted the following, as I've got here, the direct London service, which we eventually achieved. The numbers were significant. They were by far the largest group of travelers that we had to work with, and we eventually got the London service direct from Durban. Obviously, that stopped the day that COVID was announced, and now we're working to get that back. Middle East and India is another target region, going now across to the Far East. European hub access, which we have achieved quite well via Turkish Airlines. They've got an excellent European hub, but we need to build on that. And then specific tourism charters to tourism markets. Regional, critical under the trade agreements, to build the onward connectivity into the continent, and then obviously cargo as well. I'm going to try and move quickly because I think I might be running a bit.
Thank you, Hamish. Yeah, it's a fascinating presentation. You know, maybe just a minute or two if you can wrap up, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I do apologize.
No problem. So I've spoken about the support program. I've spoken about the marketing. Maybe this one can just show you where we were. From 2014, this was significant growth to 2020. And 2021 was about to be our biggest year ever as an airport. It was a threshold year. We were about to cross 6 million. And just to give you a sense of what that COVID drop looked like in terms of passenger performance and in terms of cargo performance. Now, we did do a W recovery. We did have a bit of a recovery going up in 2020, later in 2021, and then we had Omicron and we went down again. And now now we're going this, so it wasn't a V curve, it was a W curve. And that W curve, we're hoping is the end of it. Just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, we launched Durban Harare. And our network is rebuilding significantly. So we're on the road to recovery, and I think this is what we'll unpack quite a lot, how we go about that recovery, how do we build the confidence, how do we strengthen partnerships, how do we understand the demand drivers. We've almost reestablished all of our networks, but it's about how do we build the partnerships, and then again, how do we define our markets, how do we then target those markets. As I've said, we've just got Zimbabwe 3 times a week with Airlink, and they're wanting to go up to a daily service. We were talking about relinking up with Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, Mauritius, and then wider going further north. And yeah, I think the headline here really is what it's all about. It's a massive collective effort of parties. It is a constant engagement through all of those beneficiaries, that first slide I showed, to ensure that they're bound together and that everybody brings their interest to the party and their resources to the party to ensure that we do something sustainable and that can last forward into the future. So I'm going to stop there, Prof, and hand over for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamish. I think you've really summed up, I think, the essence of the challenges in the Durban Aerotropolis, and in particular, I think your role as the Dubai trade port in all of this, and in particular as well as restoring the new trade or creating new trade routes and restoring the old ones that were very efficient and effective before COVID hit. So thank you very much. I think this chapter is going to be a very relevant contribution to our proposed book volume, and we are really looking forward to the finalization of your chapter. And in essence, I think it will really cover what I believe is perhaps the center of what we are talking about when we refer to the Durban Aerotropolis in particular, and of course many other Aerotropoli worldwide that have been hit by this terrible scourge of the pandemic. So maybe we have a few minutes if there are questions to Hamish. Maybe if we can just do them briefly. If not, I think we can record some of your comments and questions on the chat, and if necessary, we can even relay them to Hamish. I know he cannot be with us this morning, so later on this morning. So if you want to ask some pertinent questions, please feel free to do so now. Thank you very much. We'll allow for a few minutes.
Prof, sorry, my gadget doesn't show the sign of raising the hand. My name is Nhlanhla Mpondi and I work for ETIA. Prof, my question is on why it always seems that as South Africans, we depend on more European markets in terms of people that are visiting our country, whilst there are so many African countries, if I'm not mistaken, more than 56 or 58 African countries, which we should be influencing our road development through them. Because, I mean, if you look at the Durban Aerotropolis, there's very few direct flights from Africa from parts of Africa to South Africa. And I was listening to my Zulu team, they traveled, they went and play in, I think in one of these countries, play against Horoya here in Africa, but it took 25 hours for them to reach home because they have to go through Europe before they fly directly to South Africa. I'm saying, why can't we have a strategy now that is going to say, we want to focus on route development between South Africa and African countries? Why is it so that—
Ondi, thank you. I think
yeah.
we perhaps have the essence of your question. Due to time constraints, I know Mr. Erskine has touched on that, but I'm going to allow him to briefly respond. I think he has many answers to your question, but if we may, Hamish, if you can briefly just reply to that, I think you have the essence of the question. Thanks.
Oh, no, thank you so much. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's been a well understood challenge. There's a few approaches to it. Every route has to be able to be sustainable, otherwise it collapses almost immediately. So you've got to have demand on both sides. To operate an airline on a route, you immediately are incurring costs from day one. So operating costs are the cost of the aircraft, the cost of the fuel, the cost of the crew. So you've got to have passengers on those routes. So very, very carefully. And that's done obviously by the airlines. You know, as Dubai Trade Port or as AXA, we don't operate airlines. So the airlines take that risk. It's a very fast changing and interesting environment. I mean, as I said, on Tuesday, we launched the Durban-Harare route. Before the COVID, we had Windhoek, Gaborone, we had Mauritius, we had Maputo, Lusaka, and we were working on Harare, Addis Ababa. So as a region, as you know, as King Shaka, that's very much part of our strategy, is to grow the regional connectivity. A lot of that connectivity still occurs a lot out of Joburg, If you look at SAA's essentially new strategy coming out of their restructuring, they're almost exclusively focused, are exclusively focused on the African market. They've opened up routes into, for example, Ghana, which are doing very well. So it's happening. I think it's happening. What's most important to make sure that it is sustainable is to ensure that the right markets are selected and that those markets are then stimulated and marketed to, so that those routes become sustainable. Because once they're sustainable, then those networks will expand. So you've got players like Airlink, who are creating a huge Africa-wide network at the moment. Obviously, Ethiopian Airways has a very large Africa network. So there are players coming in to fill that space at the moment. So I think it's going to be a feature of the post-COVID environment.
Thank you, Hamish, for that response. And I'm sure there could be many more debates around the whole issue of expanding into Africa, which I know is definitely on the cards for the medium to long term. So, and we are looking forward maybe for you to touch on some of these issues in your chapter. I see we've got a response here that talks about, besides Qatar Airlines, do we have any other airlines connecting KSIA to international destinations? I know you spoke about Ethiopia, and of course we know about British Airways that were engaged before COVID. Can you maybe just clarify on that question?
Yeah, no problem. So let's before COVID, our connectivity was Qatar, correct, to Doha, and Emirates daily to Dubai. Then the Durban-London flight 4 times a week, and then also Turkish Airways to Istanbul. And we were working on a series of others, and then obviously had Mauritius on a daily basis to Mauritius, and then our regional connectivity. Where we are right now is in that recovery stage. So Qatar is probably the one with the deepest pockets, stayed around the longest, shown the most commitment. So they obviously are there. Emirates are back. Turkish will be back from June. So slowly but surely building it up again. As I said, our regional routes are starting again. And then BA under the IAG group really got hit very hard by COVID, but we are working with them to see whether that connectivity can get reset again. They have 2 seasonal changes, one around about November, one around about March. So you've got to time yourself to those seasonal changes. So it's going to be very dependent on, but I think now that the state of disaster is gone, we should see a healthier improvement. But obviously, it's also very dependent on economic conditions here in South Africa, affordability. It takes time to recover. If flights are not at that competitive level they were previously, they are expensive both domestically, and the industry has become quite fractured. If you just look at the Joburg-Durban route, there's now about 6 or 7 players on that route, all competing on different schedules. SA has just come back, so it's a little bit fractured at the moment. Yeah.
And of course, I'm sure that the price of fuel is not helping us at all in terms of the plans and the strategies for the future, and of course, airline in terms of cost efficiency. Hamish, how do you see that impacting?
That's probably for the airlines just about the most worrying element. So you might have some that will benefit from it, and Qatar and Emirates certainly, they are able to have a far greater degree of control over the price of fuel. But those that are more exposed to it, certainly the domestic carriers in South Africa and the regional carriers, are going to, if this persists the way it is at around $107 a barrel, are going to face consumers are going to face some very, very severe challenges in the medium term. It is a very serious external threats to airlines at this stage.
Thank you, Hamish. I think we've run out of time. I think we could probably spend most of the morning, if not all of it, on this topic. But at this point in time, we may have to move on to the other presenters. But thank you for your time. We do appreciate that. And certainly we are aware of the fact that if we really improve many of our domestic services and products, especially tourism, and tourism precincts, we certainly can make a contribution to enhancing this strategic plan to improve things from an Aerotropolis point of view. So, Hamish, thank you very much. And we will convey any other questions that may pop up during the morning, relay them to you if necessary, but we do appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we will move on to our next presenter. I just want to check, Hamish, if you can maybe, I think you have removed your screen.
I've exited.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. We now, according to the schedule that I have, is that I am informed that we have Charles Shilowa and Justine Steyn from AXA, who will be presenting their abstract proposal for the chapter on considerations to promote resilient and responsible Aerotropolis development. Are they with us this morning?
Yes, morning, Chair. Let me just start my video that at least you can see what I look like. Yeah, and this morning I'm in office. So, I will quickly present on the resilient Aerotropoli. I need to be out of this meeting before 10 because I've got another meeting at 10, so I'm going to be brief. So I'm going to stop my video and try to share my screen. I'm not very familiar with the Zoom platform, so just give me a sec.
Can you also just briefly introduce yourself, just very, very briefly, and your colleague maybe that's presenting or co-presenting? Or
my colleague Charles Shilowa is not able to make it. He's our group executive of a department called Strategy and Sustainability. My name is Justine van Zyl. I am the acting chief airport planner for our Tambo Airport, and I resort under the Strategy and Sustainability division. And I must say I've spent the past, let's say since at least the last 10 years on Aerotropolis stuff, starting when Ekurhuleni decided to commence with the Aerotropolis initiatives. So I'm just going to try to share my screen, and I see, I think it's going to work. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
100%. I can see, and I'm assuming everybody else. Justine, thanks. You may proceed.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Let me just get my laser. So I wonder how this one is going to move. Anyway, so I'm going to let me just try to move up my screen. There you go. So considerations to promote resilient and responsible Aerotropolis development. And just as a context, just a little bit of background, progress, some observations, enabling factors, or sometimes we call it critical success factors, and then maybe just a little bit of a conclusion. So just as a background, and I can specifically talk about the Ekurhuleni Aerotropolis as well as the KwaZulu-Natal, well, let me rephrase, Durban Aerotropolis, also known as Durham. So what you can see here is the Ekurhuleni Aerotropolis. This is the entire Ekurhuleni area, and then they've identified an area that you can see there in the red for Aerotropolis development, and then they've also got what they call an Aerotropolis core, where they want to enable and promote Aerotropolis development. Here on the left-hand side, you say Aerotropolis, that's an extract from the Metropolitan Spatial Development Framework. where they actually try to introduce or to incorporate Aerotropol's thinking and concepts into their metropolitan spatial development framework. And if you look at the definition of Aerotropolis, you will see that it's got an airport city at its core. And for our Tamo, you can see, what we think is airport city. That's development right, on the airport, and we've actually constructed the office block that's sitting here, and I'm currently sitting in that office block. And then I'm just showing the airport's land use plan and airport's master plan, because these need to talk to this entire concept and be incorporated. And that's what we are currently doing with Ekurhuleni, albeit on a little bit of a, it's not top priority, let me put it like that, but these discussions regarding these developments with them. Then I'm going to quickly just go on to the Durban Aerotropolis or Durban. And by the way, you see there's a date 2017. This is when the Aerotropolis master plan was, I think, accepted or approved or adopted by province. If I just go back in 2015, the Aerotropolis master plan was approved by the city of Ekurhuleni. So you can see there's a 2015 date and then there's a 2017 date. So there's a definite lag between the two. And I think, if I recall correctly, the Aerotropolis, or the Durban Aerotropolis rather, was not adopted, launched in 2019, so just before the COVID. So not much time has elapsed since then. So, but again, you can see, the Aerotropolis or let's say a graphical representation of the Aerotropolis master plan for Durban. And they've also identified the Aerotropolis core. And basically what you see here, what I call land use plan, is fitting into that. So we, together with Durban Tripod, formulated what we call a site-wide master plan, which is a plan that coordinates and integrates development of both DTPC and AXA, and also then the land that we own together. There you can just see, the blue there actually represents this. On the right-hand side, you can see Airport City, which we then regard as the core, or the core of the Aerotropolis on airport. Just to orientate you a little bit, that is the current parkade, and we've done a precinct plan to see how we can do landside development at King Shaka Airport, and that portion that you see there is actually a transportation, let's say it's a center, for lack of a better word. That's obviously, this is linking to the proposed link from Durban City Centre and Umhlanga, and then probably going onwards towards Belita. And again, there you can just see the airport master plan. I've spoken about the land use plan, but obviously the idea is to make sure this is integrated and coordinated. So that's a little bit of a long background, so we'll quickly move on. So just in terms of progress, as I said, I looked at Ekurhuleni Aerotropolis and the Durban Aerotropolis, and what has happened in the meantime. So from 2015, in terms of Aerotropolis-related development, we've got the AXA Aviation Park. It's a 33 square meters building, and that's the building I'm sitting in now. It's right on the airport, and we regard that as a main component of the Aerotropolis concept, at least for Ekurhuleni. Sort of a first step on airport development, let's call it airport city development. Then you see a development called Riverfields. Now that's and it's a little bit difficult to explain, but it is a few kilometers north of the airport on the R21 between the airport and Pretoria. Fairly major development. What's in here is guys like DHL, FedEx, DHV, huge logistics-related development. And then the Ortia Special Economic Zone is a 35 hectares development just northeast of the airport. That portion there is the actual runway. So it's sitting on the northeastern corner of the airport, and all these are special economic zones basically done by the Gauteng IDZ. And some of these developments are already completed and some of them are in progress. So if you just go to DIPS, well, the Aerotropoli Institute Africa was sort of in my mind at least, the first initiative. And yes, it's working well. We're talking to each other today, so that is great. And then if you go on, you will see that the Dubai Trade Trade Zone 2, or SEZ, has been launched. There are a lot of earthworks has been done, so they're ready for development. But except for this, and I'm going to discuss this a little bit later, nothing really happened. And I think we need to kind of start to ask the question, but why is there seemingly limited development? Maybe there's a few under. Maybe we can throw in Trade Zone 1, but really the Trade Zone 1 was basically already fully developed when the master plan, or the Aerotropoli master plan for Durban commenced. So that's interesting, and it raises some interesting questions, which I will get into now. So some observations. The progress made with Aerotropoli must always be considered to determine how resilient the developments are, and if the real socio-economic benefits flowed from the Aerotropoli initiative since the Aerotropoli master plans were completed. So it's sort of a question is, and what benefit are we getting from it? But we can say is that, or maybe it's going to take time, and maybe we should be a little bit more patient to see if there's a little benefit. So question, how successful were authorities to implement their master plans, and were the proposed catalytic projects initiated? Well, to my mind, at Ekurhuleni, there's 1 or 2 catalytic projects that commenced, and beyond that, not really anything. So it's interesting, there was a whole list for catalytic projects from both the master plans, but I think many of them actually did realize. And I don't think it's much at this stage. So Aerotropoli develops on seemingly slow to get off the blocks, or not gaining ground off the ground at all. I think that's a question that we need to ask. And then there seems to be limited progress, okay? And what we see seems to be organic and not in the result of Aerotropoli initiative of master plans. So again, if you just look at the Ekurhuleni case, actually development on the R21 development corridor commenced before the Aerotropoli master plan. And I think there's many reasons for that. And one of them is that the N1 was basically fully developed. And the economy of the Gauteng were looking for developable land and accessible land. And that's obviously sitting on R21. So to what extent was the Aerotropoli responsible for this development? Many Aerotropoli, and I said this, many Aerotropoli related projects were on the table for the Aerotropoli. Whatever did happen is that the Aerotropoli master plans, however, did guide some development. And the best example I have is at our Tambo Airport, where we were playing around with the position of our new midfield cargo terminal. And at the end of the day, we decided to put it on a northern part of the airport. Because of all the Aerotropoli latest initiatives that started to develop north of the airport. And I mentioned the IDZ, I mentioned DHL, DHV type of development, or strong logistics development towards the north of the airport. So we decided then to put midfield cargo there to support the entire logistics industry. Aerotropolus concept were incorporated, in the COE stands for City of Ekurhuleni, MSDF and RSDF. So this is what Ekurhuleni did. They had a review of the Metropolitan Spatial Development Framework. They took all those, let's call it Aerotropolus concepts, ideas, and try to incorporate it into their Metropolitan Spatial Development Framework. So indirectly, the thinking was incorporated in their, let's call it development frameworks, and to a certain extent, then they can guide developments. And the same with the RSDFs, which is a little bit more detailed level spatial development frameworks. So, the Aerotropolus is a process, is not a project, and I think Jack Father has said this many times. It's saying that you probably need to be patient, but are there, do we see real progress? So what is required and what enabling factors must be in place to ensure resilient Aerotropoli? Or is the Aerotropolus a process that will take time to unfold? And then you can see there's a whole list of enabling factors that we as Axel developed what we call an Aerotropolus strategy. So how do we want to respond to this Aerotropolus? And out of that, we actually identified a number of things that we must be present to make sure that you've got sustainable Aerotropolus development. Now, I'm not going to go through of them. Maybe just what Hamish said, connectivity and traffic mix, which is extremely important. Now, obviously, this is air connectivity, but the traffic mix is also very important. And what it says is that if you only have passenger traffic and you want to run a Aerotropolus, you're probably going to be unsuccessful, and you need a mix of passenger and cargo traffic. And I think this is what the Durban and King Shaka and let's just say the economy is struggling with, is to actually attract both. Interesting, I had a look at the stats when BA mainline started to operate at King Shaka. If I recall, it was around 2017. And you go and look at the cargo numbers, that month, the cargo numbers just suddenly shot up. It shows you there's demand, but there's not supply. So it shows you how important this is for to have successful Aerotropoli. But I just at the end want to get to this governance structure and stakeholder participation. I think that's in the first instance thing that needs to be established. We've tried many times, especially with Ekurhuleni, to try to get a governance structure in place. And for some other reason that I cannot get behind, we are fairly unsuccessful to actually have a coordinated Aerotropolus structure. So I'm putting that on the table. As a start, a key principle of successful Aerotropolus is stakeholder participation, cooperation, and coordination. And obviously with that goes a governance structure. And I just pull out a quote that I stepped on while we're doing our Aerotropolus strategy, and I'm just going to read it. The strategy is highly dependent on external stakeholders to realize any progress as an Aerotropolus. The challenge is to ensure each stakeholder realizes their own objectives while buying into the Aerotropolus strategy. A key success criterion is cooperation between all stakeholders from a political to a local community level. And I think this is, if we want to make progress, we need to work very hard on this and work on this as a first step. Chair, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justine. I think, again, fascinating and very relevant to, I think, what we want to achieve here. I think in particular, the perspective between, I think, what is a greenfields development predominantly in the Durban Aerotropolus as opposed to a brownfield situation where is real concern about the land availability, especially in the first mile region of what we generally define as being an aerotropolis, or the initial aerotropolis development. So I think some really very important perspectives there, and we are really looking forward to your chapter. I in particular agree that the issue of governance and stakeholder engagement and value adding through the stakeholders would be critical in future. But okay, let me allow a few minutes for comments or questions. Can anybody who may want to raise questions or comments proceed now? Thanks, Justin. You will stay online. Thanks. Am I missing any hands or any comments or any questions? I see Miriam, you've joined us. Welcome to Dr. Miriam Wiedemann, who is co-editor of this proposed volume this morning. Miriam, yes, please raise your question. You're welcome. Thanks.
Yeah, good morning or good evening, everyone. For everyone who's joining from Australia. Sorry I was late because I was coming out of another meeting. For these success factors, do you think that one is more important than another? Would you rank them in any kind of order?
Yes, if I can respond. Yes, I do think so. Probably the stakeholder side of it, people working together, is probably the most important. Then following connectivity, and that is air connectivity, but with that, also extremely important is surface connectivity. Now, if you're sitting somewhere in a very remote area and you have bad connectivity, you shouldn't even think about, going the Aerotropoli route. But in some cases, also, you're sitting with an airport, and maybe King Shaka is a fairly good example, where it's sitting a little bit remote from the main city centers, Durban and Umhlanga. But fortunately, it's got it's fairly good connectivity. The only issue there is that connectivity is only road connectivity. And to make that even more successful, or make sure it's successful, we're definitely going to need to look at a rail link or some other dedicated public transportation link for that airport to really make it strong. Now I think for those, and then from a local point of view, that we've seen, every time we want to do development, there's no bulk services. And then you need to go through a process, and the services takes a long time to get in, and by that time, developers has lost interest. I think those four is probably the most important. There's obviously some other factors, like, if you've got a very low GDP in your area, don't even consider it, and there's some things that you cannot do. You cannot do much about. But to my mind, that's probably, sort of the top 4 or 5 for things that should be there, or you should work very hard to establish. Thanks.
Thank you, Justine. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, I think I do have a question.
Yeah, sure. Please continue.
Thanks a lot. I'm looking at the critical success factors of Aerotropolis, but there's one key issue which I'm not seeing, that of local government, which is able to work, deliver water, clean street, because I believe the concept of Aerotropolis is based on tourism. So how do you hope to sustain this concept if perhaps at local level there are issues with regards to service delivery, which is very common now, of late. Cities like Durban, Pietermaritzburg experience a lot of these challenges. I'm sure of also that other cities in South Africa have the same problems. Now we are mentioning this big concept, of Aerotropoli. And I also saw the issue of GDP. And then how do you grow the GDP and sustain this concept if the local is not necessarily up to scratch? So I think there's a very big disjuncture between your concept and what is actually happening locally, and the issue of sustaining this concept. I'm not sure it's going to be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin, if you want to respond to Nhlabate's comment there.
Yeah, Chair, very quickly, and I must absolutely leave in 1 minute. Yeah, local authority is key, and everybody needs to work together. And that's why so identify your stakeholders: local authority, province, national, the community, state-owned enterprises, developers, very important. Everybody needs to work together to make this work. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. I know Justine has to leave, so thank you, Justine, for your presentation and foreshadowing of a great chapter, which I assume will make that contribution of comparing the two major Aerotropoli in South Africa. So we do appreciate your time and your proposed contribution. Of course, we don't have too much time in this first session, so we will want to proceed. And I think our next presenter this morning is, let me just check, it's Ms. Mapumulo. If she's with us, maybe you can just introduce yourself and maybe load your presentation. I think she's going to do a presentation on mega infrastructure-led project development versus essential services in Durban, which I suppose would probably raise the issue of the importance of essential services as raised by the previous question. So, Ms. Mapumulo, if you can proceed, we would appreciate that and looking forward to that. Thank you. If you can just briefly introduce yourself as well.
Okay, good morning, Prof. and fellow colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to be part of the academic conversation with the AIA Aerotropolis book chapter. My name is Gugu, a geography PhD student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and I think it's important to mention that my contribution towards this book chapter stems from my PhD, which is currently ongoing. And with that said, my PhD's aim is on the commodification of developments in African cities. I am exploring and examining mega projects within the context of African cities through the lenses of the Point Waterfront redevelopment and the development of an aerotropolis, and both these as sites. However, for this particular book chapter, I hope to look at the drivers and the discourses of the aerotropolis development in Durban, South Africa. So by way of introduction, Africa is going through a profound transformation of redeveloping its landscapes, and we have seen a growing impetus for developments in the global south displayed by urban entrepreneurism through the construction of large-scale developments and mega projects. And within this context, funding and socio-economic investments in infrastructure have become a recent trend in African cities. The evolving debate about mega projects revolves around what urban development means and what are the resilient and adaptive ways to improve the quality of life for all. And then the private and the public sectors make generous returns on infrastructure investments, but their profit maximization methods are often not in the public interest. So this chapter is influenced by theories and concepts of neoliberalism, urban entrepreneurism, and commodification. Prof, I'm not sure if you can see my slide.
Yes, absolutely, we can see. It's quite visible on my side. Thanks.
By way of background, thank you, Prof. By way of background, in the global south, cities are still noticeable by their distinctive landscapes that still grapple with colonial legacies, which capture post-apartheid initiatives aimed at growth and transformation. Such initiatives include the construction of large-scale developmental projects, which present a potential infrastructure-led based developmental legacy. There is no question that Africa experiences severe deficits in infrastructure, and it is undeniable that the current backlog in investments and maintenance, as well as future needs of growing cities and industries, will require the mobilization of significant funds. In South Africa, neoliberalism is seen in the development of mega projects, which are seen as one among many engines of transformation to boost the economy. So South Africa's transformative phase emphasized tackling challenges such as unemployment and inequality, and gave South Africans opportunities to improve their living standards. Beyond conventional service delivery such as water, electricity, roads, clinics, and school, mega projects have their place. There is also a need for different sorts of infrastructure investments. So democracy has created a stable South Africa, emphasizing political and economic leadership to be crucial in improving the country's growth performance. So the government has fallen short of delivering services within municipalities, causing protest and damaging of public property. Thus, poverty levels have remained significantly high in post-94 South Africa due to poor economic performances, giving rise to mass unemployment. Furthermore, South Africa continues to
Gugu, can I just ask you, I think your slides are not progressing. If you can just check I'm not sure whether everybody else is experiencing the same problem. We're not seeing your other slides that you're speaking to. Yes, I think now we can see them. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So then within this context, one of the government's routes to resolve the backlogs created by apartheid is through large-scale infrastructure development projects. So with regards to the significance of the book chapter, or my contributing elements would lie in that many lower income households face challenges in accessing the benefits of infrastructural projects. And this brings about questions of how promised benefits are then translated into meeting local citizens' needs. And then in this context, this chapter explores the Durban Aerotropolis. It is contended that the Durban Aerotropolis aims to enhance urban, regional, and national competitiveness in order to make the city more economically viable. So the Durban Aerotropolis is recognized as a recognized significant enabler within the city's infrastructural catalytic projects list. Thus, the chapter focuses on the drivers and the discourses of mega project development in African cities, focusing on the Durban Aerotropolis. So with the findings, as I said, that this chapter will stem off from my PhD. So what has come out quite strongly with the effectiveness and the benefits is that mega projects are catalytic and they're strategic projects, and they are essentially and play a strategic role in the national economy. So mega projects around the port are now being proposed as being critically important for Durban. Similar projects like the airport are also important for tourism-linked projects like that of the Point Waterfront. So mega projects are necessary and very critical in taking the city to the next functional level and being able to compete globally, but also to strengthen the role of the local economy. So value of investors, and these are mainly commercial investors, which in turn creates or make Durban multimodal, a logistic hub or a city hub, which then opens up a multitude of opportunities across various sectors. And that then opens up social developmental demand in the form of labor, as well as social amenities in the neighboring areas. And then mega investments then create value chain opportunities for different businesses. And for example, the Durban ports, which is the business port in Africa, and it also is in close proximity to the airport and a gateway for the rest of Africa. However, when we look at the transnational interest being translated into the local citizens' needs, as a way of example, just because transnationals invest in the region doesn't necessarily benefit of it. It's something that should be probably more effectively regulated. So the bottom line is, whatever infrastructure projects are taking place, it should be for the benefit of the people of the region, then obviously the province, and then of the country. So when we now look at the challenges, mega projects are not easy. They require very clear mandates, clear institutional arrangements, clear budgeting, and clear delivery targets. So they're not easy to implement. However, their impact can be significant to the economy. So, and this then translates to the inclusiveness of Afrocentric model, which is going to be about what are the challenges that we are addressing, such as spatial inequity, public transport, and proximity to the workplace. And then one of the hampers of developmental efforts within the cities that has been identified is that the different personalities driving these projects also creates what is known as the stop and go, or what would I say is a stop and go syndrome. So lessons learned thus far is that they have been learned throughout the country that is unfortunately would be corrupt behavior, and many lessons are always learned because mega projects are not all the same. Their timing, their demand for infrastructure, and their social impacts, environmental impacts, and so forth. And then more challenges would also revolve around financing of bulk infrastructure and lack of investments. So to conclude, it's about being international, but sometimes the international frame also comes from being local. And as mentioned, the chapter is still work in progress. More drivers will be explored with discourses with regards to the Aerotropolis developments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gugu, for a very focused presentation. And certainly, I think the idea is also that we appreciate the work of our doctoral students and our postdoctoral students in terms of contributing towards the body of knowledge around the Aerotropolis. So, and in particular, I think this issue, I know last week, Mr. Chitongo, Dr. Chitongo, also made the point about equity and justice as far as large-scale urban developments of this nature is concerned, and the benefit that can be derived from really ensuring, I think, that equity and justice prevails in terms of the engagement of people on the ground, stakeholders, and to ensure that socioeconomic development will prevail, and that poverty, unemployment, and inequality will be addressed as part of the process of developing such large-scale urban developments. So without without expanding too much on this topic, which I think is very, very important to the development of Aerotropoli in South Africa and in Africa, maybe we can ask for members of the audience to raise questions or make some brief comments before we proceed. Thanks. I know this has probably been one of the most contentious issues of developing such large-scale projects in South Africa. So I think this is something that is really important, and we're looking forward to your chapter contribution. Any questions? Any comments? Brief comments? Okay, so if there's no one, I think at this point in time we would like to thank Ms. Mapumulu, Gugu Mapumulu, for a presentation, and certainly we're looking forward to your contribution to the book volume. I know that our next two presenters are from down south, as they say, and I know it is evening in Australia. I think we have two presenters from Australia, and I'm not sure who's going to do the presentation on health and urban airport regions. Whether I know last week we had Evelyn DeLeeuw do a presentation. But I think this is another chapter involving Evelyn, and I know Alana Cremeen and Robert Freestone are co-authors. So maybe if you can just identify who is going to do the presentation. Is it Alana?
Yes, it'll be me.
Okay, well, good evening, may I say, and thank you very much for taking the time and joining us during this late hour in Australia. If you can just briefly introduce yourself, and then you are welcome to upload your presentation and continue. Thanks, Lana. Much appreciated.
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute. So I'm Alana Cremeen, a PhD student with the School of Built Environment at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. So my co-author and supervisor, Robert Freestone, is here, and he's a professor of planning at the School of Built Environment. And our other co-author, Professor Evelyn DeLeeuw, who is from the Research Centre for Primary Healthcare and Equity at UNSW. And this work is part of my PhD project considering the determinants of health in the planning of urban airport regions. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, and I think actually that was a really good segue as well, considering the place of these mega project developments and then linking in with questions of equity and justice. So we know that airports, which were once geographically separate from metropolitan areas, are increasingly entangled within them. The health consequences of the airport can be seen through the direct influences on health or indirect influences on health. The most prominent and well-studied impacts on health are seen via the changes to that airports and aviations bring to the natural environment, which creates health risks, including from air and noise pollution, changes to green spaces and loss of biodiversity, as well as climate change. But public health approaches also recognize that changes to built environments influence health, and these can include the addition of infrastructure, changes to land use, zoning, economic distribution and employment, transport and education. These change the physical and social systems in places, which influences the health of communities. Some of these changes are normally managed or addressed through local and regional urban planning, but we see a fractured process of urban planning around airport regions. And issues can include problems with continuity with local goals and planning principles, community participation in decision-making, and conflicting priorities. So this chapter will contribute to the discourse around urban airport regions and assist practitioners through a few ways, primarily by placing urban airport regional development within the broader context of urban health, exploring the connection between health and urban airport planning goals such as sustainability, green infrastructure, and environmental approaches and livability. And it will illustrate this through a case study on the Western Sydney Aerotropolis region. Our work draws on a combination of knowledge from multiple disciplinary areas, including the planning models and development processes of airport areas, the institutions, processes, and governance of urban planning policy, and the theories, approaches, and interventions of public health promotion. Public health and urban planning as disciplines intersect frequently across theory, systems, and practice. However, airports have unique considerations both for spatial planning and urban policy. As we can see from this figure of the conceptual framework, work is already being conducted in the space between airport regions and public health. But the distinction we make here against existing public health work is that the current work takes a protective public health approach, and future work should align with contemporary urban health approaches, which also take an active promotion of health approach. Looking at factors that influence health, which we refer to as determinants of health, we can see them here displayed in the health map by Barton and Grant. And we can start to see how a wide range of determinants can be influenced by airport areas across multiple levels and pathways. So we have changes made by airport and aviation to the global ecosystem, natural environment, built environment, activities, local community, all levels of this map. And actively addressing some of these determinants in association to airport region planning are programs that centralize sustainability, green infrastructure, livability, as well as some other programs and research outputs that are looking at quality of life and well-being. And programs and policies are taking place at the moment across a wide range of stakeholders, including ICAO and partnership projects between ICAO and UN Habitat, the Airports Regional Council in Europe, the Paris Regional Urban Planning and Development Agency, and the Airports Cooperative Research Program in the US as just a few. So the work here is focused on a case study in Sydney, Australia, where the Western Sydney Airport is being developed as key infrastructure for regional transformation. It's being built on a greenfield site on the lands of the Dura people, who are the traditional custodians of the region. And it will facilitate the goals of 30-minute cities, 24-hour near airport economy, and multiple high-skill job hubs and precincts, as well as associated education precincts. All of this will also be supportive to rapid population growth in the area, including the associated required housing and social infrastructure. So in preparation for an airport-focused regional transformation, a research hub of the University of New South Wales, the Centre for Health Equity Training, Research and Evaluation, and the Southwestern Sydney Local Health District undertook a research agenda with various community partners over the past 6 years. And some of these works included conducting a health impact assessment on the communication of the development of the airport, participation in an independent peer review of the EIS, and a work on healthy airports, which looks at taking a settingless approach to airport development. The airport was chosen for a case study because of the importance to the future planning direction within the Greater Sydney region. So the case study is based on the Aerotropoli precinct plan, which covers 10 precincts with 6 the focus of early development, including agribusiness and the Aerotropolis core. This plan takes a landscape-led approach with explicit reference and features of livability and sustainability, and a focus on green-blue infrastructure planning. A major focus of the analysis is on the stage plans for the greater airport region of the Western Sydney and its processes. And it looks at the airport region specifically, as well as local council responses to the airport. And the analysis will determine the alignment of planning with the healthy urban planning principles and processes considering social determinants of health, and continuity with local planning goals regarding health and well-being. And the development is occurring in stages, and an analysis was done of the draft precinct plans, and the precinct plans have just been finalized last month. So an updated analysis is needed to be done now. And depending on the time frame of publication, it may be possible to include preliminary findings from interviews with airport and urban policymakers and planners that are investigating what is health in the context of planning for urban airport regions. And so I think I fairly flew through those, and that's wrapping up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alana, for, I think, a very focused presentation. And to my mind, absolute critical element of Aerotropoli developments. And of course, the whole issue of health, I think, will definitely make a huge contribution to our first volume. We also know that airports have traditionally been seen as undesirable because of the noise pollution and, of course, the related spatial allocation of land around the airport precinct in the first mile. So, and of course, recently, airports perhaps even demonstrated exemplary leadership as far as infectious diseases like the COVID pandemic is concerned. So I think airports are perhaps leading in terms of ensuring from that point of view that they are exemplary in terms of managing such infectious disease situations. And of course, when people from all over the world, jump onto an airplane and come to an airport, previously we never had real concerns about, infectious diseases, et cetera. So today things have changed dramatically, and I think we have a new norm as far as health in airports and through airports are concerned. Are you actually referring to your case study as the Badgerys Creek Aerotropoli is in the Badgerys Creek area? Is that correct? Because I think Evelyn also made a presentation where she, I think, referred to Badgerys Creek, which is the precinct in which the airport, the new Aerotropoli is situated.
Yeah, and Badgerys Creek was the name of the airport in early planning stages, and now it's being referred to as the Western Sydney Airport or the Nancy Bird Walton Airport. Now, as it's progressing through and its positioning is being finalised and its naming is also progressing.
Thank you.
But it is in the Badgerys Creek area, which is where it's geographically located.
Thank you for clarifying. I think we really also have a nice opportunity for comparative case study between that new Aerotropolis and, of course, Durban Aerotropolis, which is also a greenfields development. So I can foresee that we are going to have some very interesting information and knowledge emanate from people contributing from that point of view. So really looking forward to that. But maybe at this point in time, it would be great to, if we can receive some questions for Alana. And I know one of the benefits of having Australia on board is at least we drive on the same side of the road. So when we come to Australia or when you come here, we at least don't have to stress out about the dangers of trying to drive on the opposite side of the road, like we do when we go to the US or to Europe. Yeah. So one advantage at least. But okay, any questions for Alana that any of the participants would like to raise at this point in time? I see there's a comment here. Thanks for the presentation. Looking forward to the outcomes and responses to your investigation of what are healthy airport cities in the context of Aerotropoli. Yes.
I'll actually say to that point, there is a currently existing report called Healthy Airports that does look at the healthy cities work that's been done and applies them to healthy airports, and that was done by the Centre for by Chetra in southwestern Sydney, and that does look at different dimensions of airport planning, but it takes it through from the terminal all the way out into the regional planning context. Our case study at the moment is more focused on the regional planning context rather than, sort of the terminal through journey. But that airport does, that report does exist if you'd like to look it up. I can put a link in the chat.
Thank you for that, Alana. I think certainly that would be a great reference as well. So I see there's another comment there that says, wonderful presentation. What lessons can we learn with regards to ensuring the nearby environment is protected going forward? More specifically, the barn swallows. I don't know if you're aware of the barn swallows near King Shaka Airport, but there's a project to protect barn swallows that migrate to KSIA on an annual basis. I think we've been told by the air traffic control staff when we visited there about this project. Are there similar concerns maybe at your Aerotropolis precinct?
I don't know of specific protected species or species concerns. I do know that bird strikes, as well as biodiversity and preservation of local species, is a priority across the airports. The environmental protection factors are not necessarily my specialist area. So I can't really speak to specifics in terms of that species, unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much. It would appear that there aren't any direct questions, but certainly I think from the responses I can see that there is great appreciation for what you are going to contribute, and all of the best with your doctoral studies. And we are really looking forward to your contribution to our book volume. So thank you very much for your Professor Freestone, to attend as well. We're looking forward to medium to long-term collaboration between our Aerotropoli. So hopefully many more things can emanate from this first round of book volumes that we are planning. So really great to see that there are many similarities and challenges that I think we will be addressing in the years to come. So thank you, Alana. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think our next contributor is also from colleagues from the University of the Sunshine Coast. I think I have it here that it is Nicholas Stevens who is going to present to us his proposal, a systems model and design framework for resilient airport cities, exploring the functions, priority measures, activities, and resources required. Nicholas, I know that you are with us. I'm seeing your name on the list, so you are very welcome to check in and introduce yourself. And of course, when you're ready to load your presentation, if you do have one. Thanks, Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice to meet you,
Prof.
Online.
Yes, you too, and thank you, everybody, and thank you for good morning and good evening for Australian colleagues. So my name is Nicholas Stevens. I am the Program Coordinator of Urban Design and Town Planning, and also a researcher in a research centre here on socio-technical systems in a beautiful little place called the Sunshine Coast, which is about 100 kilometres north of Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, on the east coast of Australia. So it's terrific to be here, and I hope that you find my presentation interesting as well. I'll just share my screen for you now. So I hope that you're looking at that screen. So it's a pleasure to explore this chapter with you and my proposal for it. So tonight's presentation, I will talk to the abstract quite specifically. And then I want to talk about this notion of cities as complex systems or complex socio-technical systems and urban challenges. I'd like to then overview the methodology which I'm proposing to use here as well, and the human factors and ergonomics framework, the specific model, and then really talk to the power of the modeling approach that I'm proposing for airport cities here also. So the book chapter probably sits most firmly within the kind of ecosystem or conceptual elements of it. And it really is exploring the design of, understanding, and we've heard this from both sessions, that airport cities are complex. They're complex processes with a whole array of interdependent factors to consider. And what systems modeling says is that when complexity is the problem, systems modeling is one of the solutions. And that's what I want to explore in this book chapter. The socio-technical systems model draws together the array of airport perspectives and guidelines and principles, and tries to articulate them in a single model. It's a framework that presents as a methodology for both the evaluation of existing airport systems, but also the design of new systems. Importantly, it's a future-focused approach. So it thinks about what could be for these and is formative in nature. And I hope that you find it interesting as well. So the approach to the book chapter is around resilient airport cities. So drawing together all the literature, policy, guidelines and principles, some of which we've heard this evening. Understanding the unique and context-specific issues related to developing nations and local and regional economic development priorities and those Africa-specific contexts, and then using the systems methodology to kind of pull it all together. So the chapter really sits here in the heart of those three approaches. To go on a little bit of a journey for the context is that we all understand, we know that cities are complex systems. We've been thinking about cities as complex systems for a long time, whether that's, Jane Jacobs, or whether that's Le Corbusier thinking about them as machines, or in the 70s as biological systems. It's well established that they are complex, but what we have trouble with is exploring them in that way. And if we look at complex systems simply by the parts, we're missing a lot of what that interactions are. So we actually need to understand that overall behavior and the emergent properties of those systems to better understand them. And that's what this approach seeks to achieve. Airport cities are complex. They've been part of our imagination and psyche from the earliest days. And here are some early conceptualizations of airport cities. And, it's probably hard to say whether we have a perfect airport city at all in this essence. But they've certainly been a motive and conceptual ideas for the longest time. And even my early work, so I was fortunate enough to do my doctoral studies in airport cities, the airport metropolis, with Professor Freestone, Professor Baker, Jack Casada and others here in Australia. And to arrest some of that complexity, we talked about them. We put together this conceptual model where we said, look, there's infrastructure, governance, economic development, and land use. So, the kinds of questions we need to ask of them is, how is infrastructure provided? Are there comprehensive frameworks that integrate the airport regionally? How do public and private relationships work when it comes to infrastructure provision? And the work was principally focused on the Australian airport system, which is largely privatised. And a lot of that coming out of that showed that there was quite a lot of fragmentation and disconnect. When it comes to land use planning, were the local master plans considered in the airport master planning and vice versa? Did they really understand the local and regional economic development plans or transport strategies, social strategies, community strategies, health planning? And the answer is no. Many of them were just solely focused on airport-centric development. Governance as an issue that we've heard about this evening already, that strategic direction of the airport. And not all airports want the same strategic direction. So understanding how the resources are allocated, how decisions are made and by whom, that vast array of stakeholders that need to be involved. Economic development, is it airside, is it landside, is it aviation driven, is it airport driven, is it real estate development? What are the integrated strategies? What are the regional economic development plans associated with it? So it's a vast and complex issue, but often we continue to try to look at it in the silos. And so more recently, my work has been looking at complex systems and methodologies to explore them. And what I've discovered is that in the human factors and ergonomics literature, they have a whole suite and a legacy of science that deals with complexity. So with my PhD cohort and myself, we've been publishing a range of case studies utilizing these methods to explore complexity. And I've written a book around these methods to look at complexity. Importantly, there's a legacy of science, and particularly for safety critical systems. So these human factors and ergonomics methods and systems approaches are already familiar in road transport and aviation, defense and security, command and control and healthcare, but they're not well known in urban development. And to apply them here in airport cities would be a first, and I think a significant step forward in understanding the complexity that we're all trying to arrest here as well. So they talk about them being socio-technical systems. So this is about humans fundamentally, technology of all kinds within settings. But what I've identified is that the parallels of socio-technical approaches really align with what we want from urban development as well. We want to use technology as a tool to assist. We want humans as assets, core assets, people in the system. It's promotion of quality of life for everyone. And importantly, it's responsibility to all stakeholders. And we've heard a little bit of that this evening already. So the actual design approach that we use is one called cognitive work analysis, and it comes out of systems engineering and was in fact used first of all to design complex systems like nuclear control systems. But this first phase called work domain analysis is an important one. And what it hopes to do is it hopes to provide an abstraction hierarchy and establish a design framework and a description of a system across 5 levels. So what it provides is a simple but not a simplistic model of that complexity. And it's inclusive of all elements. So we've been talking tonight about equity and justice, determinants of health, infrastructure connectivity, the enabling and success factors. These would all appear within this model. And but what it does though is it draws those links between them. So for example, right here at the very top, you have what is the purpose of the airport metropolis? For what reason does it exist? How do we measure its success? What are the kinds of things? Is it aviation? Is it workload units? Is it determinants of local health? What are the activities that a resilient airport city needs to perform? And then in the bottom level here, it's about the resources available to the system, whether it's runways, lights, local strategic plans, whether it's land, whether it's developers, whether it's finance. We understand the resources available. And so it describes what could happen in the development of an airport city. So just to delve into that a little bit more, it's the kind of work that we do is we think, why does it exist? And if we're reviewing plans and policies, we're thinking about these kinds of key words: objectives, aims, intents, values and priority measures. So how can we tell whether the system is achieving its purpose? It could be measurable aspects like criteria or GDP, but it could also be determinants of health. It could be welfare. The activities that are required, so what functions must the system perform? And of course, the bottom level is around the resources. What functions do the physical objects in that system undertake? And what are the resources and the requirements we need? What infrastructure, what tools, what terrain, what landscapes are important? So briefly, and for example, and don't be alarmed, but here is a model of a smart city. So essentially, what we did in this paper, and the smart city is another concept that's kind of much maligned and poorly defined, is that we pulled together all the literature on a smart city and presented it in a single model. In this paper, we then went and looked at what was seen by the global index as the most, each year there's a global index of the smartest cities in Australia, or in the world, sorry, and identified the attributes of them within this to actually look for shared understanding and key leverage points. So this is sort of what the model will look like. But importantly, it's about understanding how it works. So I've just begun a very kind of draft version of what an airport's functional purposes of what an airport city might be. But importantly, if we take a single node in the middle here, which is something like smart delivery and management of infrastructure, and if that is the question, what, then quite simply, why we do that is linked above, and how we do that is linked below. And whilst that seems like a simple element to understand, what it does is that notion of means, ends, linkages works right across the system. And so you can tie in all of those elements that we've been talking about and begin to understand the shared dependencies between them, and use this as a framework for design and also for assessment as well. So the means ends relationships are fundamental to its success. Importantly, here's one we did for main streets, and we talked about stakeholders earlier. So you can attribute stakeholders to particular elements as well. So who has the responsibility? We know it's not just governments, it's not just airport authorities, it's not just the community. So who has a stake in the various nodes? And you can begin to understand, where are the weaknesses, where are areas where there's only perhaps one stakeholder, which presents as a kind of a weakness, where are areas where there's a really shared interaction for it as well. So it's a powerful model in helping everyone see their place in the puzzle. Importantly, the outputs can be then used for things like social network analysis, where you can begin to then do further detailed analysis of the relationships between objects or artifacts, the relationships between the values, and explore it in a much more empirical way, simply than having aspirational keywords for development as well. So look, the power of this modelling approach that I propose to use here, and I will need, cooperation and collaboration and support from, Africa-centric, experts here as well. But it brings together all that airport city thinking into a single kind of holistic approach. It's not the answer, but it helps us think about the questions we need to ask. It's got the capacity to map all of those components and their interdependencies. It can be used, as I said, for existing or new systems. Importantly, stakeholders can see themselves within that puzzle. You can put in there things that are quite objective, like, infrastructure connectivity with determinants of health. So you can have things that wouldn't ordinarily fit within something like that. It breaks us out of our silos. Importantly, it allows for policy testing. We can remove nodes, or we can put nodes into the system. We can break links between them, and we can explore the interdependencies or the impacts of it. It's user-friendly, because it's those means-ends relationships. You can in fact do it on the back of an envelope if you wish, although there is software to do it. It allows for scenario development. It allows for the prioritization of strategic approaches. And importantly, it allows us to consider the airport city as a system within the system of an existing city, if it's, if it's brownfield, or in itself, if it's a greenfield type airport development as well. So that is my proposition for a book chapter, and I hope you find it interesting, and I look forward to collaboration and cooperation there as well.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that very focused presentation once again. I'm sure some, if not all, most of the audience may have been baffled by the intricacies of your model for especially smart cities. But we've just a week ago had quite a few discussions in an international conference on smart cities, and I do have an appreciation that what you've displayed there accurately reflects the complexity of large and smart cities today. So, and unfortunately, I think we have to be analytical about what we are proposing in terms of future smart airport cities. So I can certainly see that your approach and your model and apply to even our situation here at the Durban Aerotropolis and the Oliver Tambo Airport Aerotropolis Ekurhuleni will have great value, and I think your contribution as a conceptual contribution to analyze and continue to shape Aerotropoli will make a huge contribution to this volume. That is my personal opinion. But again, I think, yeah, thank you. So it was really great. I know it was focused and it was brief, but I certainly believe that I think once you start, writing your chapter, there would be a lot more explanation.
It's quite dense. It's quite a dense topic to get through, but the underlying factor is that when we think about what we heard, Justine say about enabling factors and success factors, rather than having them simply as a list, we can understand the relationships between those factors and the resources available to the particular environment as well, and the relationships between those success factors, because none of them sit in isolation. And so I think that's probably one of the more powerful things, is that we can draw together many of those elements that we all know are within that airport city or airport metropolis, but begin to consider them as interdependent and begin to allocate responsibility for them as well. making sure that the community is brought along for the journey, making sure that equity and justice is one of the core outcomes, and what's the implications for that. So, like I say, it's a provocation. It's not the answer, but it can certainly help direct and think about the possibilities of what could be is important. So thank you for the opportunity.
Certainly, I think, and that this is the kind of approach that I believe we would be very excited about in terms of following, in terms of our knowledge generation and shaping leadership for the future of Aerotropoli in Africa. And of course, when we start home here, I know many of our colleagues in the province here that are attending this morning would be very intrigued by, I think, this kind of approach and model. And maybe, I know there are some of our colleagues that policy planners that are working through the application of similar models. I do see there are some comments here. I think Kriveshan Governor said, mentioned here, I don't know if you've had a chance to read that.
I'm having a look at that now, Prof, as well. And you're quite right. The way in which in terms of the way in which neural networks work and the way in which that model works is quite similar in that regard, in that it kind of helps that attribution. So yeah, there's certainly probably experts in machine learning who are terrific colleagues that I could work with, because my machine learning knowledge is scant. But yes, it's similar in that it works with the kind of neural networks interdependencies as well. But yes, and so thank you for that. It's it's in that same complex systems area. Yeah, the holistic approach. I'm pleased that it does sit well. It does sit well because it does allow everyone to see their place and for all kind of stakeholder involvement. And you're quite right. That's important for the sustainability. If we continue to kind of silo our issues, then that is the death knell of sustainability. So I appreciate both of those comments. Thank you.
Thanks for that response, Kevin. I do see we have two hands here, Shlabati and Miriam. So Shlabati, I'm assuming that's your first name. If you want to raise your question or just clarify your correct name, I'm just seeing your name on the screen here. So please continue. Thanks.
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, my name is Tlabati Sbonegalis. I'm from UKZN, Pietermaritzburg. Now I see the topic is about disasters. And then my understanding of the concept of disasters would relate to, the concept of resilient city. It is more about disasters in terms of how resilient the city is to disasters. But the presentation, I didn't see the presentation addressing that. I'm not sure if I missed the issue of disasters and resilience. And it was more of
you're quite correct. I didn't deal with disasters nor COVID specifically. It's really about the conceptualization of the airport city itself. But that said, we use this modeling technique for exploring COVID in public open space. And so you could put a node in there such as a type of disaster. What would be the implications for COVID as a disaster? But you could just as easily put in flooding. So what nodes would be impacted by flooding within that particular system? You could put earthquake. You could put other air disasters as well. So no, you're quite right. I didn't deal quite specifically with the notion of disaster, but the model itself does lend it to exploring the implications of such events. Thank you.
Thank you. Miriam, I see you have your hand up. Please proceed. Thanks.
Just a quick question. Yeah, very nice, Nick. And I don't know if I just missed that, but what is feeding that model? Is it documents or is it an ongoing approach as more as we understand by putting up new nodes? Or how do we feeding that model?
Yeah, terrific question. So in the initial instance, there's a whole range of data that could go into it. The proposition for this chapter would be that range of literature, policy, and guidelines, and specifically in the Africa context, and particularly around developing nations. And what you can then do is you can further augment that with interviews, with consultation, with survey data. So it's not about it's sometimes not even about collecting more data. It's about putting the data that we already have and the knowledge we already have about these issues into the kind of model as well. But you're quite right. It's intended as it can be used, and we have one that's a living system. So when more implications come up or when things occur, you can insert new nodes or new knowledge into it as well. So, but yeah, great question.
Colleagues, thank you very much. I think if we continue with this discussion, we would probably exhaust the rest of the day, or the rest of the evening in Australia. But we want to thank Nick for a very focused presentation. I think very exciting. And certainly I see it as a great contribution to our book volume. So Nick, thank you for your time and your effort. We do appreciate that. Colleagues, I think we want to take, maybe at this point in time, we would like to take a comfort break. And I know we have 2 more presentations, possibly 3, but I'm not sure if Professor Uphold from the US will join us, because it's also a very unusual time of the day to make a presentation. I think it's like 3 o'clock in the US, so I'm assuming you may not join us, but there are 2 more presentations following this session. So let's take a 10-minute comfort break, and we resume our webinar in 10 minutes time, if that is in order with all of you. So thank you again for all the presenters this morning. It is much appreciated. Thank you. I'm assuming we have all had our break, and maybe if we can, I'm ready to proceed. Dandu, I just wanted to check whether our recording is continuing on YouTube. I see it's still recording and live, but is I think if you are ready, we can proceed. My understanding is that we have a presentation by Phumzile Dlamini from AXA, and the title of the proposed abstract or the chapter is Fast-Tracked Aerotropolis Implementation, what is needed versus what is possible. Phumzile, are you with us this morning?
Yes, I am, Prof.
Great. Maybe then, if you don't mind, good morning, Phumzile. Nice to see you on the screen. If you can briefly introduce yourself, and I think you have access to sharing your screen, and then I think it will be great if you can proceed with your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Good morning, colleagues, and yeah, there's been some wonderful proposals that we've seen this morning, and so thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to switch off my video. My name is Phumzile Dlamini. I work for Airports Company South Africa, and I'm a senior airport planner. You guys would have seen my colleague earlier, Yestein. So I work with Yestein. Hope everyone can see the presentation.
Yes, I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. It's visible, thanks.
Thanks. So, colleagues, I'll be quite short on my proposal. It's around fast-track Aerotropolis implementation, what is needed versus what is possible. Right, so just in terms of context, the Aerotropolis is a socio-economic strategy, which is translated and implemented spatially in an airport-centric urban form. Investors are obviously attracted to the Aerotropolis because of its excellent airport infrastructure, which enables businesses to connect to export markets, and also the excellent regional infrastructure. So the land use, the ICT, the good surface transport and bulk services. In South Africa, we've obviously established two Aerotropolis initiatives, that being the Durban and Ekurhuleni Aerotropolis, and there are plans to establish an Aerotropolis in Cape Town. Enter COVID-19. So the pandemic, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been enormous. The global economy and financial markets, it's affected global and financial markets, and it's led to a rise in unemployment and disruptions in income. It's also disrupted manufacturing, transport, and service industries. And you know, here I've tried to sort of illustrate the global impact of COVID-19 on the aviation sector, and you can see just 2.8 billion reduction in passengers, operating loss for the airlines of approximately $380 billion US, and for the airports, 104 billion. So globally, Aerotropolis projects are being fast-tracked in an aid to support productivity, investment, and jobs in the wake of COVID-19. Some of these measures include fast-track development applications and zoning approvals, and investments in connectivity and bulk infrastructure. So a lot of countries globally are looking at the Aerotropolis as really their economic recovery strategy to get out of the pandemic. Locally, look, the impact has also been quite enormous. We've seen, Comair, which operates British Airways in Kulula, going into business rescue. SA Airlink recorded a loss. SA Express went into liquidation. SAA went into business rescue, and even ourselves as airports company, we were struggling with some liquidity challenges. But the impact of the aviation sector is quite large, and this is the local aviation sector. It supports about 70,000 direct South African jobs, and really the aviation sector also supports the tourism sector, which was also hugely disrupted during the COVID-19 pandemic. And why this is important is that aviation is the catalyst for Aerotropoli growth and development, and therefore its recovery is also essential for our Aerotropoli to flourish. Locally, beyond now the COVID-19 pandemic, we also experienced the civil unrest of July 2021. And whilst there are efforts to stimulate investment, and those continue to be a government priority, initiatives to stimulate economic development within the Aerotropolis must contend with negative investor sentiment and constrained government budgets. And these budgets were really utilized to manage the pandemic, to rebuild critical infrastructure that was damaged, and to address other competing social imperatives. All of this in the context of an anticipated long aviation and economic recovery. So there's a lot to be done, but there's not enough money to go around. So coming now to the aim of my chapter proposal is that I would like to then investigate the impact of COVID-19 and the civil unrest of 2021, and really its impact on the two Aerotropolis initiatives, that's the Durban and the Ekurhuleni Aerotropolis. And then to also contextualize the existing challenges in stimulating economic growth, and then to define some enablers or catalysts for fast-tracking Aerotropolis implementation. You'll note my colleague spoke of what the critical elements are in the Aerotropolis, but I think my project will focus not just on what those elements are, but how do we then, how do we stimulate fast tracking of these initiatives by speaking to developers and what they expect, or what would enable them to freely invest. And so some of the themes that I will be looking at is what our current prevailing recovery strategies and tactics are. And I've highlighted there those essential elements that affect investment in the Aerotropolis, and that's really my colleague's proposal. But I will also look at what it means to streamline property development processes, what institutional bottlenecks are around, and the governance realities that we need to be cognizant of. And then finally, if there are any opportunities or solutions for fast tracking these developments, that is what I would like to write about. In terms of the methodology, there'll obviously be a bit of literature review on the impact of COVID-19, the civil unrest, and then these global Aerotropolis fast tracking recovery programs, what that actually means, how are they doing it, what are those initiatives and what are those enablers. And locally, I'd also like to interview a couple of developers and investors to also get their sense on what are those key things that will allow us to fast track the implementation of our Aerotropoli. Colleagues, that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much again, Phumzile, for a very focused presentation with even less time utilized that was available to you. So thanks for that as well. I do know that our colleague and friend Amish cannot be with us at this point in time, but I think he would have appreciated much of what you are going to address in your chapter. And in particular, I think the whole notion of ensuring that we maximize foreign direct investment and as well domestic direct investment and in investor confidence in our region specifically, following the double tsunami effects of firstly the COVID-19 pandemic and of course the unrest, which was to some extent probably related to, I think, the hardships caused by the pandemic, but other political factors as well. So it would be really great to see your analysis and your conclusion about how these effects can be mitigated in future, and of course how we can fast track I think the developments within the Aerotropolis, which are so critical to our region. So again, thank you very much. I think it sounds like a great contribution to our book volume. Colleagues, yes, I think maybe are there any questions from our audience or any comments? I see no comments on the chat, but if there are questions to Phumzile, please proceed and by way of maybe raising your hand so that I can identify you. Looks like we've had a long session this morning, and maybe fatigue is setting in, webinar fatigue, if we may call it that. But if there aren't any questions at this point in time or any comments, then I think we can just thank Phumzile for her contribution and for, as I said, a very focused presentation on what she is proposing. And certainly, I think we are looking forward to that contribution. Maybe at this point in time, then I can ask our next presenter. The way I have it is it is Sarah Gibson, also from our University of KwaZulu-Natal, and Sarah is proposing a chapter on pandemic aero mobilities, COVID-19, and governability, or governed mobility, and the Aerotropolis. Is Sarah with us this morning? Okay, there you are. Thank you very much. Will you maybe briefly introduce yourself, and then and you can upload your presentation and tell us what you are planning to write on. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to present this morning. My name's Sarah Gibson. I'm an Associate Professor in the Centre for Communication, Culture and Media Studies in the School of Applied Human Sciences at UKZN. I'm also the College Director of Teaching and Learning for Humanities. My research background is really cultural studies and mobilities, so it's a slightly different approach to the Aerotropolis that I'm taking in this paper, I think, but it does intersect nicely with some of the papers we've heard this morning. Okay. So since the COVID-19 pandemic emerged in 2020, its global spread has been associated with the volume of international flights. It was through flying that the first case of COVID-19 was identified in South Africa when a tourist returned home to Durban from a skiing holiday in Italy. On the 7th of January 2021, a Pakistani man arriving in South Africa on a flight from Dubai was arrested at King Sharka International Airport for the illegal possession of the drug ivermectin. This case encapsulates several key pandemic immobilities, in the space of Durban's Aerotropoli, ranging from the aeromobility of flights from Dubai, the embodied mobility of a Pakistani man, the material mobilities and smuggling mobilities of drugs, and the immobility of the COVID-19 vaccines, as well as the policing of virus mobilities and disease mobilities. This case also highlights the politics of mobilities during the COVID-19 crisis, as mediated through the practices of flying in the space of the airport. This paper
Sarah,
critically...
if I may intervene or interject, I'm not seeing your slides progressing. I'm not sure if you are doing it on your side.
They will do in a minute.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no problem. So this chapter would critically examine the complex systems of governed mobility in the space of Durban's Aerotropoli in the context of COVID-19 as an emerging infectious disease and its resultant national state of emergency. So this chapter would be situated in the new mobilities paradigm. This paradigm critically explores the intersection of a range of different mobilities, including embodied, corporeal mobility of people, the mobility of objects, imaginative mobilities, virtual mobilities, and communicative mobilities. The cultural geographer Tim Creswell was one of the first to conceptualize mobility as being distinct from movement. He argued that while movement is abstracted when we move from A to B, mobility is instead regarded as socially produced. Mobility is always given meanings within relations of power. Mobility, unlike movement, is contextualized and lies at the center of constellations of power, the creation of identities, and the microgeographies of everyday life. The politics of mobility, which I'm interested in the relationship of pandemics and Aerotropoli, refers to the ways in which mobilities are both productive of social relations and produced by them. So mobility and immobility cannot be separated from their social and political contexts. Mobility is concerned with power relationships, or what Doreen Massey has termed the power geometries of of mobility. So we can think of politics and mobilities can be explored through what Creswell calls constellations of mobility. These are the entanglements of physical movement, an empirical fact, representations associated with cultural meaning and discourse, and practices of which are embodied, that circulated historical and geographical locations. The new mobilities paradigm, however, is increasingly being critiqued for its focus on the privileged mobilities in particularly Europe, Britain, and North America. The South African transport historian Gordon Pirrie, for example, has recently argued that the new mobilities paradigm is firmly located in the global north. A new field of research within the mobilities paradigm is that of aeromobilities. This focuses on the social implications and meaning of flying, where aeromobility is defined as the dominance of flying as the normal international mode of travelling. The airport within this field is seen as an iconic space and as a paradigmatic locality. Airports then, as Lassen argues, are global transfer points to the global economy. They are international borders. They are highly privatised. They are not ahistorical or interstitial, so they are not non-places. They are highly divided and stratified. And the social, economic, and geographical outreach of airports are hard to precisely define. So airports provide an infrastructural and institutional mooring, but little research on airport spaces has been produced, as Bradley Rink argues, within Africa or South Africa. Airport spaces are contexts for and products of mobility. Salter argues that airports were originally designed and constructed much like railway terminus, a space to pass through with no distractions. Contemporary airports, however, are designed in the image of shopping malls. So we can see the twin factors in mobility and stillness at work within the airport. So my research and my proposal for this chapter is really to look at this notion of aeromobilities, but also this notion of health mobilities, which is an emerging field of study as well within the mobilities paradigm, particularly what has been termed pandemic immobilities. So mobilities is important for understanding the emerging pandemic of COVID-19 globally and within South Africa. And particularly with the 5 levels of alert, which governed and policed and regulated movement and transportation, both domestically and internationally. So Tony Gattrell's work on health mobilities would be crucial here, as well as Roger Keel's work on health mobilities. And this would draw on a lot of research that exists on the space of the airports, flying, and previous epidemics such as SARS, the H1N1 virus, and Ebola. So this chapter would really look at the policy and regulation of flying and the experiences of flying throughout the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic was associated and spread through research has shown through the international flying, and the COVID-19 pandemic through lockdowns and regulations presented a major threat to air travel that's not been seen before. And I think Hamish talked about this. We saw on that first graph he presented the sheer drop of numbers and passage through the airport at Durban. And the quote I just wanted to end with, which I think would be the starting point for sort of what are the lessons learned for flying and the Aerotropolis in an emergency and emerging infectious disease, would be from Lynn. Aeromobilities are the very reason the world finds itself where it is today, but it is also likely the answer to how societies will connect again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, again, for very focused and presentation within the time constraints that we have. And I think personally, I believe that the whole notion of aeromobilities and mobility in general is critical to, I think, the debates and the discussions we will have in future within Aerotropoli development. So I think it proposes to be an excellent contribution to that side of the whole debate, and maybe being at the center of the essence of what Aerotropoli are all about. And we have seen how I think the pandemic has impacted on this very notion of mobility. So I see you created quite a lot of excitement with your presentation, and we already have 2 colleagues that would like to raise some questions or make some comments. So Miriam, I think your hand was up first, so you may proceed. Thanks, Miriam.
Okay, thank you. It's more common, and I was wondering if, at least in the discussion, you could expand on a more generalized statement in terms not only COVID, but what kind of other disruptions we could get, and what does that mean for our air traffic in the Aerotropolis. I think that would nicely lead then in the next chapter of air traffic and Aerotropolis, or the other way around. But okay. I think we all hope that at one point COVID will be something of the past. So if you maybe can look more at the general, also other kind of health crisis we had before, like SARS and Ebola, and who knows what comes next. But yeah, very much looking forward to read the whole paper. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. That's really useful.
Thank you.
Would you like you like to respond to that, or?
I think just to say, I think the paper does need to be situated with the previous epidemics or health risks that have existed, particularly with the rise of air travel. But also a lot of the literature now is looking at sort of disrupted mobilities from many different types of emergencies, whether it's climate change, health, politics, war, famine. So I think I could situate it within that wider area as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Okay, I think we've got a question from Shlabati. You might proceed, Shlabati, with your question. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof, and thanks for the presentation. You know, when I saw your topic here, I saw the concept of governed mobility. When I saw that concept, I thought of perhaps governmentality, which is a concept from Michel Foucault, where he critiques the role of government and the control. So I'm not sure if your conceptualization of the chapter is a critique of the control that would have been come with trying to control the spread of the pandemic, which the government would have used as a tool now to control people. As I'm saying that when we look at this topic, government, the word, you know, governmentality, to me, what comes to my mind is this critique of the role of government in control. So, which is informed by Michel Foucault governmentality concept. I'm not sure if that is what the chapter is doing or is something else, you know. So that is the issue I'm not clear about. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I mean, my conceptualization or how I'm employing this concept of governed mobility will draw on that sort of history of control, biosecurity, and the regulation. Really drawing on this concept of governed mobility within the mobilities paradigm, which does look at governmentality, but it's looking at how mobilities are being controlled by governments and other regulatory groups. So yeah, it will address those sorts of issues you raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other responses, comments, questions for Sarah at this point in time? I know that I think when we enter airports at the moment, we kind of still feel quite safe by all the regulations and all the mask wearing and all the physical distancing and sanitizing processes. And I believe that I think we've entered an era, Sarah, where I think this will become the norm. And making passengers feel safe, because I think if passengers fear and you know, based on what we've experienced over the last year or two, it will definitely still affect air travel and how people will move around. And so it's going to be an interesting thing to watch the trends and to see why people are traveling less and moving around less, and whether that is in fact going to be the trend in future or for the next, maybe at least the short and medium term. So I think it's going to be looking forward to your contribution, and I think how it will ultimately impact on large-scale urban developments such as Aerotropoli, and of course the essence of what Aerotropoli are all about mobility and about feet moving through airport precincts and in between cities and between countries. And surely I think we have entered a new era, and the whole notion of mobility, I think, is at the center, I think, of this debate, to my mind. So really want to thank you for your contribution, and looking forward to see how it's rolled out, and ultimately I'm sure it will make an impact and a contribution to the debate. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
Henry, if I can just briefly comment. really interesting that you were saying people traveling less. My experience in Australia the last few weeks is the opposite. And obviously we hadn't that massive impact of COVID as had other parts of the world. So I appreciate that that's probably one part of it. But while COVID numbers are rising again, and a lot of states have got rid of mask wearing completely, and we're still wearing masks in the airport and on the flight. No one really knows why when we're not doing that in a big shopping mall. But my experience of the last few weeks have been the flights are absolutely packed. There's not one seat left. And you get the nice little comment, please try to social distance, and everyone has a good laugh, because you can imagine an economy with every seat sold, there is no social distancing. So I was really surprised how quick people feeling confident again to travel and having no issues to being close to other people again. So we don't know for how long, but I just wanted to mention that that's really interesting to see the different locations in the world, how that people react quite differently. And I think that really will also impact international travel on different levels, from different origins to different destinations. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam. Yes, I think we may even see the same sort of trend here in South Africa now that I think a few days ago our government has abolished, finally all the levels and state of emergency levels of concern, and I think we have a 30-day period in which we are still going to ensure that there's a sort of a reasonable transition into normality again. So I'm assuming we may even see the same trends here, and there's a lot of catch-up that needs to be done. So it's going to be very interesting to monitor and watch behavior worldwide, and of course in particular countries. And I think you're quite right. I think we are going to probably see the return to normality, and maybe even extended traveling, especially because people are looking forward to having those holidays that have been cancelled, and of course all the business transactions that need to be caught up and restored. I certainly think that will be the case. But we're looking forward to see our colleagues and academics monitor these trends, and to ultimately see how it will impact on the Aerotropolis industry, so to speak. So, colleagues, thank you. I think we have now almost exceeded our time for the purpose of this morning sessions. I do know that, let me just see, I think there is one chat message. Somebody said, let me just check here. I think there's a message from Alana. Thanks, Sarah. I'm not familiar with mobility literature, but I'm very interested, wondering, will you be considering specific policies or more the broader movement, border policies across the time scale? So maybe as a last response, Sarah, would you like to just briefly respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Alana, so thank you. And I've also been grappling in my mind since your paper how our papers sort of intersect with each other, sort of work on health and the airport city, but also sort of health and mobility through the airport, if you like. So I think I'll probably start looking at sort of this notion of airport and infectious disease more generally. Obviously looking at COVID, but also the implications of that for post-COVID. I can't see the airports getting rid of masks and vaccination certificates or PCR tests anytime soon. So it is interesting how much of this is going to be the new normal for flying in particular.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there may be some opportunities for you and Alana to also engage about how your paper and your interests interact with the broader notion of health within airports and of course airport precincts. and of course in aviation, which I think is a general concern following the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much, Sarah. Again, great contribution. Looking forward to that in future. Colleagues, I'm not sure whether our last contributor is with us. I think Professor Uphold from the University of North Carolina has proposed a great paper for the purposes of our volume, our book volume. I know Professor Uphold is intending to contribute with a paper called "When the Centre May Not Hold, the Costs of Discouraging Airport City Growth." And I know some of you and many of you that may have met him and know about him. He's been at the center of the Aerotropolis debates for many years now. I think he's somebody who is appreciated within the industry, and his papers and contributions, are all valued. So we are really looking forward to his contribution. I know that he proposed that he would share his slides with us, and I know it's a very difficult time of the day to expect him to join us, unless we do it later on in the day at some point in time. But I think at this point in time, we do appreciate his contribution as well, and many of the others that have presented. This looks like a great volume and edition for our book publications. And I certainly want to thank Professor Dr. Miriam Wiedemann, who is a collaborator in this project, and her contributions, and I think many of the authors that have presented here are as a result of her engagement with all of you, and especially in Australia. And certainly I think we are trying to get as many international contributors to join us in these book projects. So certainly a great way, I think, to interact, to build capacity, and to contribute towards the knowledge, the corpus of knowledge in the Aerotropolis industry for the moment, of course, with all our challenges, but also in future. So we are really looking forward to some great interactions and hopefully maybe opportunities to physically meet again, now that I think all the restrictions have been, most of the restrictions have been abandoned, and we can fly freely. So certainly we're looking forward to such opportunities, both in South Africa and in Australia, and hopefully maybe in future in Europe and in the US, with our colleagues and collaborators who become part and parcel of the Aerotropolis Institute's activities. So I do want, at this point in time, also want to thank Ntando Koza and Dr. Nyasha Chiwawa, who are collaborators and who have been part and parcel of organizing this webinar. And certainly I think it's been a great opportunity to do this. And I think it was a bit of an experiment to do a first round of reviews of our chapter proposals. And I think most of you that have responded, I know, have appreciated the opportunity to participate and to be part of this. What we are now proposing is to make the final presentation to our publisher, which is going to be Springer, publisher in Switzerland, that I believe will be very keen to publish our first volume. So we will definitely communicate with all of you, and at this point in time, I think we also plan to try and get the ball rolling, and to get our authors to start writing, and to hopefully meet the deadlines that we will have to set for publication of this nature. So really looking forward to that. Miriam, I don't know if you want to maybe say a few final words before we bring this webinar session to an end. So you're welcome if you would like to. Thanks.
Well, I would say I second everything you have said. So really a pleasure to see people again, if it's only on the screen. I have been twice to Durban, and I hope we can do that a third time. And I think it's really interesting to see also the contributions from Australia and South Africa, because I can see already how we can collaborate with each other and also can write a chapter, maybe the two of us, for the book, in terms of comparing maybe the two Aerotropolises and the contributions, maybe the first major finding, and that could go into us, lead to the second volume. So I think there's really interesting contributions coming up, and I can see how that will flow nicely, chapter by chapter, to give a nice overview of where the Aerotropolis is and where the different challenges are. And I'm quite delighted to see that we are not only having challenges, but that we are actually also really coming up with some papers with some great solutions, how we tackle the Aerotropolis more successfully in the future, or having a bit more planning tools. So I think that's quite nicely. Henry, do we have any idea about the next deadlines for our authors, or are we distributing that by email? You're muted.
Apologies. I think it would probably be safer to just check on deadlines with the publisher, and then maybe we will communicate, Miriam, and then communicate to all our authors about deadlines, which we're probably looking at, around about June, July. But I think we will just have to confirm with authors, about their own particular situations and whether they'd be able to make some deadlines. And I think so we'll try and negotiate those deadlines to ensure that we can perhaps progress rapidly from here onwards. So that'll be great. Yeah. So I do know that we've had a few of our presenters and authors, apart from Professor Uphold. I think Mr. Hempson, Mark Hempson, was also planning to do a presentation, but I don't think he is joining us today. But apart from one or two, I think we've basically covered the ground. And so I think we are ready to maybe proceed and share a lot of information amongst authors for any final comments if required. But I think that is more or less the plan, that we can try and move towards submitting draft chapters by around June, July. But again, I think Miriam will just confirm with all the authors to see whether they are comfortable with such deadlines. So if there are any questions from anybody or any comments at this point in time, maybe just a minute or two before we close this webinar session. Or even from yourself, Miriam, if you would like to add anything.
No, I would only like to thank all contributors for your time here today and preparing the abstracts. And then already a future thank you for writing your contribution, and thanking Henry and the whole team at the University of KwaZulu-Natal to organize these sessions.
Thank you, Miriam. Colleagues, thank you very much again. It is much appreciated. Your time is much appreciated. And I think at this point in time, we will continue discussions outside of this event, and we hopefully will bring this project on track as soon as possible. And I will certainly communicate with all of you about the future. So again, thank you, and have a good day. And for some of you, have a good night's rest. It's close to bedtime, I believe.
Definitely. You have a good day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.